Okay, so welcome to the video lecture for Module 2, first of the series here. The objectives of the video lecture here are to identify the significant role projects contribute to the strategic direction of an organization, to stress the importance of establishing project priorities and top management support, to describe the linkages of strategies and projects, to describe a scheme for prioritizing projects that ensures top management involvement and minimizes conflicts, to apply an objective priority system on project selection, and finally to recognize that today's world may require a shorter range strategic plan. So why project managers need to understand strategy? Project management has been evolving over time, and it used to be that project management was focused solely on planning and implementing projects. And well, what we've seen is this evolve to the point where it's now important for project managers to clearly understand their organization's mission and objectives. With these insights, project managers have the ability to make decisions, as well as top executive level management, but they have the ability to make decisions about future projects, as well as any necessary adjustments to ongoing projects so that they stay in alignment with the organization's strategies. This also gives project managers the ability to clearly delineate how various projects contribute to the organizational mission so they can explain that to senior management. Projects and strategy, right? Some of the mistakes that are caused by not understanding the role of projects in accomplishing the organization's strategy. So you could really focus on problems or solutions with low priorities for the organization. Another one might be, overemphasizing or pursuing exotic technologies that don't fit the organizational strategy. The last one on here, engaging in a never-ending search for perfection that only the project team really cares about. And these are what I would refer to as wormholes. So you go down these wormholes and try and get something that, you try and perfect something that might satisfy the project's stakeholders, and the project team really wants to overemphasize that. So those are some of the mistakes there. So the strategic management process. Strategy is implemented primarily through projects. Successful implementation of projects means reaching the goals of the organization and therefore meeting the needs of the stakeholders or the organization's customers. Projects that don't contribute to the strategic plan then basically waste critical resources. Projects are linked to the strategic plan because projects represent how a strategy is to be implemented. Since some projects are more important than others, obviously, right? The best way to maximize an organization's scarce resources then is through some sort of a priority scheme, right? Which allocates resources across a portfolio of projects, which serve to balance risk across all of that portfolio and ultimately contribute the most to the strategic plan of the organization. So in many organizations, there is a disconnect between the organization's mission and strategies and objectives to the operational decisions, and this is no different when we look at a portfolio of projects. So the 4 activities, the strategic management process involves assessing what we are, what we want to become, and how we're going to get there. And the major generic components of the process that your book lists include the following: defining the mission of the organization, and that would include an analysis of the external and internal environments. Setting objectives, formulating strategies to reach those objectives, and then implementing strategies by using projects. So this is a slide, the characteristics of objectives. We've got SMART goals. Your book talks about this, and you may have seen this, in many other classes. But SMART goals are goals that are specific, measurable, assignable, realistic, and have some element of time, right? So you have to be very specific at what you want to achieve. For example, if you are trying to increase profits, you want to say the objective is to increase profits by 15%, so it's measurable, within a certain time frame before the end of the second quarter or whatever. Of course, that goal has to be assignable and it has to be realistic. So if you were to say you want to increase your profits, 600% within, 3 months, is that really realistic? The need for a strong project priority system, as I've mentioned, it allows you to balance risk and choose different types of projects and make sure that your entire portfolio is well balanced. So the book talks about 3 different ideas. The implementation gap. And the implementation gap really is a situation where you have many perspectives or different ideas, among managers from different departments of the organization in what the organization's strategy or mission means. So that means that, they really just have different ideas about what the mission of the organization is. Or alternatively, it also could mean that maybe these managers have outright conflict among each other about what the mission of the organization is, where they actually challenge the other's interpretation. So it could be either of those, right? So it's either they completely and outright disagree with each other about the mission of the organization, or they just have different perspectives and maybe they don't really realize. Organizational politics, your book talks about the sacred cow here, and the sacred cow is really a pet project from a person high in the organization who's going to push that project forward no matter what. So that's what a sacred cow would be, and that's the politics within an organization. Resource conflicts and multitasking refers to where you would have issues of sharing resources or alternatively scheduling the same resource. And there's a little bit of a distinction there. Let's say, for example, you have a highly technical professional and there are 2 or more projects that require that professional's time. Well, that's a problem of oversubscription. Is that person oversubscribed where, they're required to work on both projects, but it would require 150% of their time, 75% on each? Well, that person would be oversubscribed. And that would be an issue of sharing resources. Let's say, for example, each project needs 3 weeks of that person's time in February. Well, okay, that could be, is there a way to schedule that resource across 2 months or, over January and February, where that way that person won't be oversubscribed? So that would be kind of the scheduling side of it. And this is a common problem when you're dealing with organizations that run multiple projects concurrently. So some of the benefits of project portfolio management, it builds discipline into the project selection process, which we'll talk about here. Obviously, you're able to better link project selection to the strategic metrics of the organization, which allows you to prioritize project proposals, right? And usually that's done across a common set of criteria. And sometimes you'll see that criteria may change based on the type of project that it is. It allows you to allocate resources to projects that align with the organizational direction. Of course, a huge benefit is balancing the risk among your portfolio and the types of risks that you might be willing to take. It provides you a mechanism to justify killing projects if they don't support the organizational strategy, and it improves communication about the project portfolio to the entire organization. So an open published priority system really ensures projects are selected on the basis of their contribution to the organization. So if that priority system is not open, squeaky wheels or strong personalities, strong people in key departments might be able to get their projects selected, but really for the wrong reasons. So here you're looking at some of the different types of projects that your book defines, that the Larson text defines. You have compliance projects, must-do projects, strategic projects, and operational projects. Let's say that you are the local electric utility, Idaho Power. Well, a compliance project might be having to install carbon scrubbers on their existing coal-fired power plants because the Environmental Protection Agency, the feds, have implemented a new regulation regarding CO2 emissions. So that's something that has to be done in order to be in compliance with the government. An operational project then might be implementing some sort of a new software system for their control room that improves the efficiency of balancing their generation load from all of their power plants, right? And this efficiency gain would translate into reduced costs and therefore increased profits. Well, let's assume that Idaho Power is not a regulated utility. But so an operational project really then tries to get them to, accomplish something, whether it's, improved efficiency or, increased profits ultimately. A strategic project, on the other hand, for Idaho Power might be the construction of a new power plant altogether, right? Which could take several years from beginning to end of the project to site and design and construct that power plant. So this type of project is something that's strategic in nature and is planned and put in place due to something that is going to be strategic for their future needs. And really, by carefully aligning your project proposal with one of these types of classifications, you have the opportunity to increase the chances of it being selected. Remember, senior management typically will allot a budget for each of these categories, right? So they'll have a budget for compliance projects, they'll have a budget for operational projects, etc. That can sometimes be independent of the actual project itself, project selection. I mean, it certainly is a part of project selection, but some organizations operate that way. So knowing what types of funds are available for each of these types is a great piece of information to have. Knowing what your risk portfolio currently is, knowing what your senior management biases are is another important piece of information. Those types of things may cause some people to attempt to move a project proposal into a different classification to improve, so that they can improve their chances of their project being selected. So just some important considerations there. So we talked about the classification of a project. So these are some of the elements there. We talked about the classification of a project, selection criteria, and as I stated earlier, different criteria may be used depending upon its classification. There's also the sources of proposals. Where are the proposals allowed to come from? How the proposals are evaluated, and then, of course, how the portfolio is then managed of a portfolio management system. So when we look at the selection criteria, obviously there are financial models, and we'll talk about several of them, and there's non-financial models. There's multi-weighted scoring models, and we'll talk about that as well here. So when we look at some of the financial models, really project selection, they're also called capital budgeting methods, and they are basically financial tools used by your project management office or senior management, project managers, and they use them because the firm has limited resources to inform their decision-making process when they're faced with choosing between multiple projects. So in other words, you have $500,000 allocated for projects. You've got 10 projects proposed that cost $100,000 each, well, you can't do them all. So you've got to have some way to evaluate them. And these capital budgeting methods are the financial tools that you do to look at and compare. So the first one is the payback model. The payback model, measures the time the project will take to recover the investment. Obviously, a shorter payback period is going to be more beneficial, and this model really emphasizes cash flows, but it is very limited in what it can do. So it's kind of a quick snapshot for you. It ignores the time value of money. So the payback period, the formula is initial investment divided by net cash flow. So if you had $100,000 of initial investment and your net cash flow was $20,000, it would take you 5 years for your payback period. So break even is another one. I'm giving you an example here of break even, and you may have had this in business courses in the past, but the project is to design a new golf putter. If you sell a golf putter for $30 and it costs $25 to make, so your materials of $12, you've got labor of $4.50, and your indirect costs would be $8.50. This is on a per unit basis, so you get $25 per unit of cost to make. Well, if that's the case, your break-even point, the formula is your initial investment divided by your net profit margin. So you have a profit margin per unit of $5. So if your initial investment was $100,000, plugging that into the formula, 100,000 divided by 5, and you get a break-even point of selling 20,000 units. So this tells you you'd have to sell at least 20,000 units to recoup your investment. The third one is return on investment. Your book doesn't talk about all of these, but I just wanted to share the majority of them with you. So return on investment, your project return on investment is going to be equal to the total expected benefits minus the total expected costs. That number divided by your total expected costs. And let's say if you had expected benefits of $115,000 and your costs were $100, your initial investment, well, divided by 100,000 and you're going to get 15%. That's your return on investment. Net present value is one of the tools that your book highlights. This one does take into account the time value of money. And here's the formula down here. It uses your organization's minimum desired rate of return, right, the discount rate, to compute the present value of all the net cash inflows. So if you get a positive net present value, then it meets the desired rate of return. So it should be at that point eligible for further consideration. If it does not, if it's negative, that means that the project does not meet the rate of return that your organization requires. So you would reject consideration of that project. So the book has a couple of examples in there, and they're using it, they're showing you in Excel, Exhibit 2.3a. So your example comparing two projects using the payback method. Right, so you've got project A here on the left, you've got project B here on the right. Here's your formulas. Your payback period is going to be equal to D8, cell D8, which is 700,000, divided by D9, 225,000. That's the annual savings that you're going to get. So your payback period is 3.1 years. Project B is 3.6 years. And then it computes the rate of return as the opposite, right? The D9 divided by D8, so 225 divided by, so your rate of return here is 32.1%, and your rate of return for project B is 27.5%. So looking at this calculation, both would tell you to accept because you're exceeding the 15% desired rate of return. Both of them are less than 5 years. But remember, payback does not consider the time value of money. Okay? So if you look at it using net present value instead, your required rate of return is 15% for both Project A and Project B. Okay, you have an initial outflow of $700,000 for Project A, and then your inflows that you can expect each year is going to be $225,000. So if you sum these 5 years up, which is the time frame that you are considering, so you've got an outflow of $700,000, you've got inflows of $1.125 million. That means your net is $425,000. And if we're going to use the net present value, you're going to do C7 plus net present value of B6, which is the rate, the discount rate, and then D9 through H9, which is the net inflows. And you're going to calculate a net present value of $54,235. So this tells you it's positive. That means it is going to meet the required rate of return. So you should continue considering this project. Project B, we do the same thing and we get a net present value of negative $31,000. That means it does not meet the 15% rate of return. So again, you accept Project A because it's positive, and you would reject Project B because it's negative. And again, you use this simply because you want to consider the time value of money. Here's another way of looking at it, and I wanted to just show this to you because it puts it into a little bit more detail for you to look at it based on the numbers here. Your cash inflows in your first year are obviously zero because you haven't started the project. Your outflows then, and this way it breaks it down, and you look at your net cash flow by year. Okay, year one, your net cash flow is going to be $65,000 because you have inflows of $150,000 and outflows of $85,000. Okay, and you do the same thing for year two. Inflows of $200,000, outflows of $125,000. Your net would be $75,000. Okay. You do that for each of the years over the course of your project. And then you're going to you bring it to the next table and you look at what your discounted cash flow is. And you take that cash flow from from year one, which was 65. So if I were to go back to our previous slide, year one, our net cash flow was 65,000. So I'm going to put that here, 65,000. I'm going to divide that by 1 plus 0.08 to the first power. And this is going to be my discounted cash flow. Okay? And you're going to do that for each year. So this is the time. So year one, year two, year three, year four, and your discount rate, 8%. So your discounted cash flows are here for each year. You're going to sum all this up, and based on your initial investment of $200,000, this is taking that amount, this amount here into the using the time value of money, and it's saying after a year it's actually worth a little bit less, right? Because you could have had, what's the opportunity cost of if you had used that investment for something else and you could have got an 8% return? Well, if you add all these up, you're going to get a net present value of $77,000. So that means that it is positive. You would accept the project. So when you think about all the financial criteria alone, right, those are not going to ensure that selected projects contribute to the mission and strategy of a firm. They're just going to give you some quantitative numbers to look at. And there's a lot of subjectivity in those numbers. There's a lot of assumptions that are made. So there's other considerations in decision making, such as developing a new technology or public image, brand loyalty, what's your firm's ethical position, maintaining core competencies. Those things are factors that should be considered. And further, it's difficult or next to impossible to assess return on investment for many important projects because there's simply too many assumptions. So even though return on investment is usually a key consideration for a lot of organizations, multiple screening criteria are recommended, right, for selecting and prioritizing your project portfolio. So remember, it's important to remember, financial models fail to capture some of the more qualitative factors that should also be used in decision making. Some of the multi-criteria selection models, the checklist model is one that is widely used. It's used more often than it should be. It's flexible. It's easy to implement. It applies over a wide range of different types of projects, divisions, locations, but it's impossible to rigorously compare and rank projects by priority. There's a lot of politics, power, and manipulation is very possible when you use when you use a checklist. The multi-weighted scoring models are better to use. They allow comparison and ranking of potential projects. It's an open system, allows for self-evaluation. Power and politic games are exposed fairly easily. Here's an example from figure 2.3 from your text, but this is a project screening matrix. If you're comparing all these different projects here, and what you've got on top here is you've got some important factors that you want to consider, but they have different relevance to the organization. So you've got the criteria can be stay within core competencies. It could be urgency. It could be meeting that ROI of 18%. Whatever it is you have up here. But here's your weight. And obviously, the criteria that are weighted the highest in this particular grid are return on investment of 18% or more is 3 times as important as improving customer loyalty. So this is where your subjectivity is going to lie, is how you apply the weights. Same thing, strategic fit is also 3 times more important than improving your customer loyalty. And so the way that you do this is you score your projects in each of these criteria. So in project 1, you're getting a score of 1 for staying within the core competencies. You're getting a score of 8 in terms of its strategic fit with the organization, and so forth. And then you apply the weights. So here you would take a 2. Here you would take a 24. So 8 times 3 is 24. Here you're going to take a 4. 2 times 2 is 4. Here you're going to take 6 times 2.5. And then you're going to add up all those numbers and you get a weighted total of 66. So after you do all this for all the projects, then you look and see who has the highest weighted total. And you're seeing that it's pretty clear that project 5 is going to meet the needs for your portfolio, to add this project to your portfolio, much more so than project 4. And that's how you use one of those matrices. Here's another example that I wanted to show you. This one uses a number of criteria, and we've got the financial criteria here: return on investment, payback period, net present value. And we've attributed weights to each of these of 15%, 10%, 15%. We've got a total strategic score that's weighted 20%. So your financial score would be weighted 40%. Strategic would be 20%. Organizational is going to be 15%, etc. And what you do then is you look at your alternatives. This way they're going down in a column, and you give them scores. The way that this particular scoring model works is you multiply the scores that you've given them by the weight, so 0.15 in this case, alternative A, and then you do the same thing, you add them up. whichever one has the highest total score at the bottom is alternative C in this case, is going to be the best of the three alternatives. And again, your subjectivity is going to lie in how you apply the weights, as well as how you score, you apply scoring. And so, but if you do this as a group, as a team, typically it eliminates a lot of the subjectivity and you can come to some sort of consensus on which projects might fit best within the portfolio. So how do you apply the selection model? Well, obviously there's the project classification, deciding how well a strategic or operations project fits with the organizational strategy, right? You select a model that you want to do and you apply the weights and the scores, and you see which projects align closer to the organizational strategic goals, right? And what this really does is helps you reduce the number of wasteful projects that you actually implement or move forward with. Helps you identify proper goals for projects. Helps everyone understand how and why a project is selected. So it gives everybody, and it brings people involved in the process. So when you manage the portfolio system, you have a lot of senior management input into this. They're going to provide guidance into selecting criteria for your matrices, right, that are aligned with the organization's strategic goals. They're also going to help decide how to balance the available resources among current projects. And then the governance team publishes the priority of all the projects. They ensure that the project selection process is open and free from power politics within the organization. They reassess the organization's goals and priorities, and then they evaluate the progress of current projects. So the book talks a little bit about these types of projects, bread and butter projects, and these involve evolutionary improvements to current products and services. So those are your bread and butters. Pearls represent revolutionary commercial opportunities using proven technical advances, right, that your company might have. So whether it's a piece of intellectual property or whether it's a patent that your company might have. Oysters then involve technological breakthroughs with high commercial payoffs. And then white elephants are those projects that showed promise at one time, but they're no longer viable. So just understand that these types of projects, with different risk types are mentioned in your book, and understand what they are. And that's the end of the first lecture for Module 2.